And coming down the stairs, here she comes to the basement. Shannon Hayes is here. How are you?
Hey, it's great to be here with you today. Thank you so much for having me, Joe.
Well, I'm so happy you could be here with us. I have become such a fan. Just in the last month, I have to admit that I am way late to the Radical Homemaker game. I know you've been doing this for quite a while, but I'm so happy that you could hang out with us for a few minutes and talk about redefining rich. But I guess as a way to start, Shannon, you had your whole life kind of redefined in, what was the year? 1999, I think.
Oh, probably right about then. Yeah. It's a long time
you
ago
were,
now.
it was like a Halloween party. Can you describe, you know what day I'm talking about? Because it feels like for me, that was a big change for you and your husband.
A Halloween party. Your
husband went to a Halloween party.
Oh, that one. Oh my goodness. Yeah. That one. I think I need to, can I use your couch and just lie down and put my feet up and go therapy on this one? Cause boy.
But that was a big day. That was a big, it felt like in the book, that was a huge turning point for everything for the two of you.
So I should start by telling you, I grew up very career centric, but I had two parallel lives I was living. I was on my family farm in the Northern Appalachians, in the Northern Catskills. And I had a certain farm life, but I was going to school down in the valley, which was on the suburban fringe, and education was a big deal. My parents had professional jobs. I was in grad school at that time, working on my PhD. And my husband at that time was my fiance, and we had just bought a cabin about 7 miles from the farm, and he had a grown-up job. He had a grown-up job working in county government. So I was going to grad school about 2.5 hours away, and it was Halloween. And in his office, there was a tradition that everybody dressed up for Halloween. And my husband and I really like Midsummer Night's Dream. And so he dressed up as Nick Bottom from Midsummer Night's Dream. And he used a hard hat, and he did a beautiful job converting a hard hat into a donkey's head and went to work that day.
And we should explain, by the way, where your husband worked, because I think this will also connect some dots that are about to come.
He worked for the county planning department, which was headed by a mover and a shaker in the local Republican Party, and didn't give one thought to left, right politics whatsoever. But they weren't really familiar with Midsummer Night's Dream, and they weren't familiar.
Not big readers.
Yes. So my husband was brought in and summarily dismissed for insubordination for making a mockery of the county's Republican Party.
The next day.
The next day, November 1st. And to this day, November 1st actually is a day we celebrate. That is our day to pause and reflect very deeply, because that was one of the greatest gifts that anybody had ever given us. He got fired. I came home from grad school 1 or 2 days later, and we were still in shock. And we took a walk out in the woods, and we found an old cemetery, and we sat there in the cemetery. And I remember realizing when we were employed, we were at our economically most vulnerable. And we swore we would never be that vulnerable ever again, because our mortgage, I should add, on that November 1st, it was also the day we just bought this cabin. It was the day the first mortgage bill showed up in the mail too. So it was a good double whammy. And we realized we were reliant on a paycheck, and that was dangerous for people like us who are free thinkers and very independent minded. You never know which way we're going to land on a subject. To be reliant on working for somebody who approves of what you say or do is a dangerous proposition. And to have all your income coming from one place like that is just not prudent. And we promised each other we'd be gainfully employed forevermore from then. Yeah. Never again would we go back to jobs.
What I find kind of, I don't know, humorous now, though, is that so you decide to do this thing that I think you can laugh about because you've lived on a farm since you were born. Hey, we decided we'll go into something really stable farming, right? Like Shannon, I had a client back when I was a financial planner. I've been a financial planner in a long time, but I had a client who's a farmer, and he had this joke that maybe you've heard. What did the farmer do when he won the $1 million lottery? He farmed until it was gone, right?
Yeah. I really scared my parents. So my husband and I, we had this cabin, and it was understood that I was in the final months of my PhD, that what we would do is we would turn around, sell that cabin, and I would go hunting for a job, and we would go someplace else. We started on the job hunt, and we had one particular job opportunity that came up where he and I could both work within a 2-hour radius of each other. So we could both commute 1 hour to our jobs that looked like good prospects with our professional credentials. And I started doing the math. I backed out what we were going to be paying for income taxes, and I backed out what it was going to cost us to have professional full-time wardrobes, to have 2 cars, and to be buying instead of growing our own food. And I looked at the numbers. Now, at the same time, my parents had this dirt farm, if you will. It was labeled non-viable by the state. It was considered a losing proposition, but they were slowly bringing it back to life. And I'd been helping them on weekends when I came home from grad school. I was looking at this co-job offer, 2-income family opportunity that he and I had. And I was looking at returning to the farm. And I realized when you backed out all the expenses of having a job, we were going to end up with a 2-income family, both of us working heavy hours, like 40 to 50 hours a week. We were only going to be $10,000 ahead of where we would be if we stayed on this scrappy mountain, rocky, ledgy farm and worked with my family. We hadn't even started a family yet, so we didn't have daycare costs built into this or the cost of any kind of child rearing. So I called my dad. I said, I can't afford to get a job. Now, imagine my parents, they worked so hard to raise their young college graduate who went on for her master's degree and then their PhD, and they had such high hopes. And she calls and goes, guys, the writing's on the wall. This isn't going to pay off. And I think they were a little shocked. And my father was very quiet on the other end of the phone. He basically said, well, okay, but don't take a dime off the farm. So the deal was they didn't hassle me about going for a job, but they did not support us. And Bob and I had to find our path. We got to use the resource of the farm, but we could not draw money from the farm. And that was the challenge. And then how would we build a life from there?
So there was no freak out at all from them. It was just this.
You need to know my dad. That was a freak out. He doesn't say much. So when dad says, okay, you're not taking a dime. Yeah, that's a freak out. What they said when they hung up, I don't know.
It's a whole different story. Yeah. You know, as well as anybody, though, this idea of sunk cost, right? You've got all this sunk cost into this really expensive education, as you know, and that must have ran through your head. Like people think that all the time. That must have been a very difficult decision to make, to kind of turn your back on the 8 years of this.
Okay. I will say that my education cost less, but for the same business ideas. I was very fortunate. I went to all local and state colleges for my bachelor's degree, and I just did really well in those colleges. My parents did help pay for that, but I lived at home a lot and had jobs, and I was able to graduate without debt. I went into grad school. I was actually rejected from Cornell 3 times, which is another whole story altogether. But on the 3rd time, I called them and said, you made a big mistake. You owe me an education. I'm from a New York State farm, and you're a land-grant university, and it's incumbent upon you to educate me. And argued my way in. Then, before the first bill came, I argued that they should pay for it. So
wow.
I'm not exactly a scholarship recipient. I was more of just really good at arguing. So they agreed to pay for 1 year. And then I went to them when it was time to go into my PhD program and asked my professors if they understood what return on investment was, because my grandfather had always taught me about return on investment. They kind of looked at me glassy-eyed and I'll say, I'll tell you what return on investment is. There's only going to be so much that I can generate if I'm going to live by my ideals and I'm going to go forward teaching and bringing the concepts I learn here out into the world. I am not going to recognize a return on the money you want me to pay for an education. So if you think that investing in me is worthwhile, then you have to accept that I am not going to take on that debt. So I got through with no expenses whatsoever. I made the most money I'd ever made in my life with a whopping, $15,000 a year as a research student. But yeah, I just talked my way through. And that's how I got that degree. So what I would say is my sunk costs are significantly less than other people's. And I would always argue if education is right for you, boy, you need to really argue and push and convince somebody that you're worth it. It can pay off. But in terms of time, yes.
Yeah.
I put a lot in. I funded my own research. I had to get there. I couldn't go off and start earning full-time paychecks. So did I pay? Yes. But I do want to be forthright and say I didn't graduate with that $40,000, $50,000 or $100,000 in debt that a lot of people have.
You turned over time the farm really into a brand. I mean, you have the cafe, you have your web and your writing presence. Of course, there's all the farming activity. Now it seems, and you write this in the book, that it is much easier. But tell me about those early days, though, because I'm just imagining, even though your parents already had the farm, you talk about it not really being viable at the time. Tell me about how hard that was to get this rolling.
You're absolutely right, Joe. I often hear people say, well, it's easy for you. This was all handed to you. And I got to tell you, like 20, 25 years ago, I was not handed a gold mine. I was handed a liability. And you probably talk about this in financial investing where people say, if it makes you money, it's an asset. If it costs you money, it's a liability. And that farm was bleeding, as a lot of farms are bleeding. I had to figure out how to turn that around. But to do it farm style, I had to understand how farm economics worked in a different sense. The labor was definitely more expensive than what we could sell the products for. So you have to create value for the products. You have to create value to hold on to a labor force, because I very quickly realized I needed to find other ways to bring in revenue streams to make sure that we weren't breaking ourselves under the labor burden. And when I brought labor on, I had to find innovative ways to keep them engaged with the work, because the pay doesn't look like, you can't get your corporate salary when you work for a farm. So to build that brand and to build a loyal labor force, it took a lot of work.
When you talk about the labor costing more than what you could sell the product for, does that mean, is it positioning? Is it emphasizing the fact that it's a sustainable farm? That this is not, loaded with chemicals, the stuff you're selling from the farm? Like, how do you raise the value of what essentially for a lot of people is a commodity, Shannon?
You talk a lot. You teach. I wrote cookbooks. That's how I got started as a writer, to make sure that people had great success, because we were raising. Is that you?
No. It's on your side.
I am terribly sorry. Can you hold on for a second? I have to find just get stopped. I don't even know that sound. I'm really glad this isn't live. But I did just pitch a phone. What were we talking about? We're talking about how to add value to the product.
Yeah. We left you on, you started writing cookbooks, if you want to start there.
Yeah. I actually... One of the things I would like to articulate to you is that I'm in a family business and I work with 3 generations of my family, and I'm the mom. So that means that anything that happens with my mom and dad, it comes into me and from my kids. And my kids don't go to school. They work in the business with me, which is really great. However, you might see there are some signs of that around me at all times.
That is exactly, by the way, what I expected. I expect there's this general just following your brand for the last month. I feel like there's this general like swirling of activity happening around your place. Yeah.
Yes. Remember Pigpen from Peanuts?
Don't do that. I was about to take a sip. Don't do that.
But you do remember Pigpen from Peanuts?
Sure. Yeah.
Yeah. And he always had the cloud.
Yeah.
That's how we move through our business. That's the brand that we had to build. One of the things that we realized, you said, how did you add value to the brand? And yes, it's teaching people that grass-fed is better. And it's teaching people that you do need to cook it differently so you have success. It's teaching people about what's the environmental benefit of it. But the other part of it, when you talked about brand, it's the brand. It's also teaching people what's the story behind that. And it's not, a lot of grass-fed brands came out and they were all about being slick and perfect and gourmet and beautiful. And I don't pull that off. What I realize is exactly what you just witnessed between phones and my family, who forget that I'm not always available at all times. There's always chaos around us. It is a beautiful, loving, chaotic, cloudy mess, but it is always moving in a good direction. And so part of what I've had to do is educate my clientele that that's who we are. When you taste something from our farm, you taste 3 generations that love each other, but hang up the phone on each other on a regular basis and sometimes take one another's phones and, pitch them into other rooms and do all kinds of crazy things. But we're always moving in the direction of a living system, producing meaningful things for a community that we deeply value. And we do it in a very imperfect way. So making things work economically was also about teaching people to accept that truth of who we are.
I love how being part of the community and making your brand uplift the community, I thought was something powerful. And actually, I think this is a good place, Shannon, for us to dive right into, I think that statement you just made is really about the title of your book, about redefining rich. Like, what is rich? And for you, it seems like that really is the essence of what richness is for you. But you've got this concept in the book that I know a lot of our listeners, especially if they're new listeners, chase, that it sounds like to some degree you've seen people around you chase for a while. It feels like you were chasing it. You call it the money paradox. Can you talk through, how did you come up with the money paradox, or where did that idea come from? And then you've got these 3 tenets to it that I really want to dive into.
One of the things I want to start off with explaining, coming to business from farming. Farming is considered a fantastic losing venture in this country. And when you are raised in something that's a losing venture, you can develop a self-esteem issue. What I do is not valued. And we are taught as farmers to always find a way to find more money, just like anybody in this culture, find a way to find more. But on top of this, we have this idea that what we do isn't valued. We're sort of always in a position of wanting and needing more. But as farmers, we always stay in it. You're like, why do farmers keep doing what they're doing when, they're making no money or they're losing money? We'll tell you it's the stone walls, it's the pastures, it's the mountain and the fields and the streams, it's the family, it's all this other stuff. But still, we're conditioned to think, but how do I find more money? How do I find more money? So one day, my husband and I were going out for a walk in the woods. We don't drink coffee indoors, by the way. We always drink coffee out in the woods or next to a pond someplace. It's a way to get away from the telephones and the online stuff. We just break away, and that makes the coffee a lot better. So we were going off and doing this. As we were walking down the steps, we were thinking about the fact that the roof on the cafe needs to get repaired and the car needs to get repaired. And we had a new project on the farm. We wanted to get going, a new enterprise. And we just had this brilliant idea of, well, hey, what would happen if we had a $10,000 windfall? And so we were taking our little walk and we started talking about, well, maybe we could, fix the car and maybe we could get the roof fixed. And hey, maybe we wouldn't have to take a budget vacation this year. Maybe we could do something a little bit nicer. And by the time we got to our coffee spot, we didn't have 10,000 anymore. We'd gone into debt intellectually, probably 20,000. And we sat down at this little waterfall to drink our coffee, and we realized that as soon as the imaginary windfall came, we'd spent it. But before we had that thought, when we were leaving our house that morning, we were fine. It was a beautiful day, and we were happy. We realized that money is this very elusive thing. We'll always want more of it. And as soon as you get more, you're always going to want more. So that day while sitting there, that's when we thought of the money paradox. It is always elusive. We will always want more. So the sooner you can recognize that is just always going to be there, the sooner you can realize it doesn't matter. Okay, yeah, we'd always love more money. Wouldn't you love more money? Sure, why not?
Absolutely. It is interesting because no matter what, I feel like you're always looking at the next horizon. And that hit me hard. That, by the way, is one of the three. So you nailed that one. Also, the fact that increased income doesn't guarantee more happiness.
No. In fact, I don't know what the current figure is, but last I knew, adjusted, worldwide adjusted income, it was about $10,000 per person per household is a magic figure, where if you increased income to the point where you had at least $10,000 adjusted worldwide per person per household, from zero to that, money would increase happiness because it increases the roof over your head, the blankets, the food. It gives you the basics. Once you cross that threshold, it doesn't guarantee happiness anymore. It might increase your happiness, but it might not. There's absolutely no correlation. And when you realize that money is only going to make you happy to a point, and then you realize with the paradox that you're always going to want more, so it can always be a source of unhappiness. Again, you start saying, all right, let's not bother with this. Let's just take a breather and be happy instead.
And it's so powerful. And we make that mistake all the time. If I just have a little more, well, you see this with people saying, I want to retire later, right? Or I want to push up retirement. Well, it's not about you reach this date and I'm going to have happiness then. If I'm miserable today, I'm probably going to show up at that date miserable too.
That's right. That whole happily ever after idea is really silly.
Well, and I love how scrappy you have been creating your brand and making this work for you and your family, Shannon, which is in the third tenet that you have here, which is too much material wealth can be stagnating. And I felt that in my own life, that when I have to be scrappy, my brain is I'm pretty damn smart. But if you hand me money and I just throw some cash at it, my brain's as lazy as the next brain.
I see this all the time in agriculture, and it's one of the places where we learned it. So as I mentioned, ours was a scrappy farm. My husband and I came at it. We didn't have a lot of income. We had to make things work. And even now, Satbush Hollow is held together with a whole load of baling twine, let me tell you. Someone can come on the farm and say, well, for crying out loud, you've been in business for 40 years. Invest in, high quality fences that swing on hinges, for God's sake. Well, we started with baling twine, and the first time we could afford some expensive hinges, we realized that the rocks would shift underneath and the whole thing would go off true anyhow. So you start to realize baling twine is valuable, but also we've educated so many farmers who come on, and a lot of people get into farming with a lot of money. And we can always predict when they've got a lot of money to spend. It's just like that joke you said, they've got a lot of money to lose.
Yeah.
Because they don't have to be creative. They don't have to work around things. So it was almost a predictor that they would fail if they came at it with a lot of money. Also, you find out that people with a lot of money, they either have a lot to lose and they're into losing it, or they are so worried about holding on to their money that they can't take risks. When we're down to the bone and we're scrappy, you got nothing to lose. You're free to use your wits. You're free to be creative, and you're also free at the end of the day. There's not a lot of cleanup you have to do. So you can put your feet up and kind of laugh about it. I have these days when the checkbook is the balance is nearing zero. And the one thing I can say is, well, the good news is I don't have extra bookkeeping this week because I can't pay anyone.
That's great. We joked about that with the podcast. It'd be so much easier if we had no listeners. That would be fantastic. How easy this job would be, Shannon? It'd be awesome. I want to end with one other powerful thing from and guys, we're just talking about the first couple chapters of the book here, so you can see just how much Shannon talks about. But This idea of a quality of life statement I found also very powerful. Cheryl and I have had a mission statement, and when we created that, it really changed the game for us. This sounds very similar, but tell me about the genesis, the quality of life statement. If somebody wants to go do this like you did, what do they get out of it and how does it work?
Okay. One thing I do want to say is if they go to the Radical Homemaker blog, they can get a workbook for the book that takes them through the quality of life statement too.
Awesome.
So if that's of value to people, it's there for free. They can just download it. But a quality of life statement, it's a little bit like a mission statement, except it's more family and household based. And I suggest that all members of the household who are above the age of 8 participate in a quality of life statement. It's less about what are we going to do for the world, for a career, and more about what do we want our life to look like? How do we want to be spending our days? Who do we want to be spending those days with? And it gets to the core of, as we talk about in the book, redefining rich. For me, rich means I can put my toes in soil and I can feel cool, clear water in a running stream. And it means I can go sit on a stone wall and breathe fresh air. All of those things are in our quality of life statement. It means, for me, rich means I get to go upstairs and take an afternoon nap. That, for me, when I lay down and take an afternoon nap, I am like, oh, yeah, you cannot pay me to give this. This is fantastic. I feel like I'm queen of the world. So I encourage people to spend time doing that quality of life statement. And then from there, to develop a resilient financial plan that keeps that as their reality. And that's when we get into, as we talk about the book, the 4 income streams and choosing from those and getting the right diversification.
I think that's so powerful, Shannon, because and I especially like involving the entire family, you know, and that everybody has a say, because it's not yours and Bob's statement. It's everybody's. It's everybody's quality of life.
That's right. And when everybody's on board and we all know what we're working for, we all help each other get there.
The book is called Redefining Rich, and I had so much fun reading about your story and even some of the gut-wrenching struggles that you've had. That part wasn't fun, by the way, but that part was page-turning interesting. I'm assuming people can get it everywhere?
They can get that book absolutely everywhere, and they're more than welcome to chime in with their questions and let me know their thoughts. And
if somebody's in the area, let's talk about the cafe for just a second, because the cafe sounds really fun. But it's funny when I go to your website, you're like, the cafe is open sometimes.
Well, it comes back to that quality of life statement, and it comes back to the fact that I'm a rural cafe. There was a point in our farm's development where we decided that in order to grow for the next generation, we didn't need to acquire more farmland. We needed to serve the community better. So we started this cafe. Because of where we're located with health department licensing and stuff, I'm only allowed to be open 60 days a year. And that seemed like a real limit. But then I realized, if I'm just open on Saturdays, I can funnel everybody through at the same time. Now, I've since had a lot of businesses come to me and say, hey, could you be open more? Could you do more? But it comes back to the quality of life statement. What we've realized, when you run a cafe 1 day a week, everybody who wants to be there gets there. And we're about building community. So everybody gets to see each other. They know if they show up on Saturday, they're going to see everybody they want to see. It's not like they missed them. And Sunday, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, I am off in the woods.
I love that. You're not married to it. It's so awesome. Thanks for hanging out with us and nerding out about redefining rich with us. I really appreciate it.
I loved it. I would love to talk to you anytime, Joe. And thank you for reading the book so carefully. I really, really enjoy that.